Hello, today we're going to be talking about civil rights and civil liberties. So we'll look at what these are, the difference between these two things, and how the Constitution protects them. All right, so first up is civil liberties. So what are these? So civil liberties are basic freedoms that must be protected from infringement by the government. So to infringe on a right means to take it away. So these are basic freedoms that must be protected from being taken away by the government. So, for example, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and the right to bear arms are all examples of civil liberties. Now, these are largely protected by the Bill of Rights, specifically Amendments 1 through 6, as well as Amendment 8. All right. Now, in contrast, civil rights are basic freedoms that must be protected by the government. Now, what this means is that private individuals or businesses or society at large are more likely to take these rights away than the government, right? Whereas with civil liberties, they're the group usually taking those away. That's usually the government. Now, this isn't to say that civil rights can't be violated by the government. So if we talk about voting rights, for example, that can be taken away by the government. But by and large, civil rights tend to be, or more likely to be infringed upon by private society, individuals, or businesses. What are some examples of civil rights? So the right to be free from discrimination is a really big one. The right to a fair wage, the right to vote, et cetera, et cetera. These are all really important examples of civil rights. And civil rights are largely protected by the Constitution, the amendments, but as well as legislation passed by Congress. So the Voting Rights Act, for example, protects people's civil right to vote. All right, let's do some practice with comparing and contrasting civil rights. So suppose that Congress passes a law that states that the media may not criticize the president. Is this a civil liberties or a civil rights issue? All right, if you said civil liberties, you are correct. This is because in this instance, the government is attempting to limit freedom of speech. All right, a hospital pays male nurses 20% more than female nurses in an effort to recruit more male nursing staff. Is this a civil liberties or a civil rights issue? If you said civil rights, you are correct, because this is an instance of a private business, a hospital in this case, discriminating against people based on gender. So that would be a civil rights issue. All right, suppose an apartment complex refuses to rent to Asian Americans. Is this a civil liberties or a civil rights issue? This is also a civil rights issue because, again, this is an apartment complex, so a private business committing an act of racial/ethnic discrimination, so civil rights. All right, suppose a city passes an ordinance, which is like a rule, banning all of its residents from owning handguns. Is this a civil liberties or a civil rights issue? All right, so this is a case of civil liberties. So we have a government, in this case the city government, attempting to limit people's freedom to bear arms. All right. Now, a really important idea in civil rights and civil liberties is this idea of the balancing test. So your rights and your liberties are not absolute. And what that means is you can only exercise your rights and liberties as long as they don't limit the rights and liberties of other people, or as long as they don't harm society. So, for example, you have the right to practice your religion freely based on the First Amendment. However, if your religion says that you must practice human sacrifice, the government can limit your free exercise of religion rights there because your choice to practice human sacrifice infringes on other people's rights to life, which the government has said is more important here. So again, this is this idea of the balancing test, and this is the idea that courts must balance individual rights and liberties with society's need for order and stability. Now, because of this idea, civil rights and liberties can be very controversial. So let's take a look at a few more examples. All right, so suppose that a family believes that blood transfusions violate their religious beliefs. Should they be allowed to prevent their sick child from receiving a blood transfusion? Or another example, suppose that a website publishes leaked documents that reveal details of the United States' use of torture. Should that website be allowed to publish those documents? And then finally, do individuals' rights to own guns outweigh the government's interest in preventing mass shootings, or society's interest in preventing mass shootings? All right. Now, who is protected by the Constitution? So, who has civil rights and liberties? So, most rights and liberties are guaranteed to all people in the United States, including non-citizens. This is very important. So, undocumented people have rights and liberties as well. Well, why, right? You might be asking, they aren't citizens. Well, again, this goes back to that concept of natural rights, which we talked about in the very first unit, right? Our founding fathers believed that all people are born with certain rights that no government can take away, right? They have these rights just by virtue of being human. That said, there are certain rights that can be denied to non citizens because the federal government has what's called a compelling interest or a higher purpose in limiting. So, for example, undocumented citizens or non citizens can't vote, they can't hold public office, they can't serve on juries, and they can't stay in the United States indefinitely, right? And again, the United States government has decided that denying non citizens these rights are in the best interest of the government, right? It doesn't really make sense for a citizen of another country to be able to vote in US elections. All right. Now, last but not least, let's talk about the Ninth Amendment. So, our founding fathers also knew that it was impossible to list all the rights that people could have, right? Therefore, they included the Ninth Amendment, which, in fancy constitutional language, states that the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. Now, in simple modern language, just because we've listed a bunch of rights here doesn't mean that people don't hold other rights. So again, that is the Ninth Amendment. So make sure you write this down. The Ninth Amendment is the amendment that protects rights not spelled out in the rest of the Bill of Rights or the rest of the Constitution. So what are some of these other kind of secret hidden rights, the secret menu of rights? Well, the Supreme Court has interpreted the Ninth Amendment as protecting other rights, such as they've established a right to privacy in the court case Griswold v. Connecticut, which is all about birth control. And actually, building on that case, the Supreme Court established a right to an abortion under the Ninth Amendment in Roe v. Wade. And finally, the Supreme Court has established a right to homosexual conduct in Lawrence v. Texas. So again, these are all rights that are not spelled out in the rest of the Constitution, but the Supreme Court has interpreted the Ninth Amendment as guaranteeing these rights to people as well.